you know that new life truly begins with Him. Right now, I want you to meet someone whose new life in Christ began after seeing Christ on the Coral Ridge Hour.
Donald Warren seemed like an average kid, but what he witnessed growing up was anything but average. As the son of a leader in the Ku Klux Klan, he saw hatred firsthand and grew to despise his father.
My father had a gospel of racism and anti-Semitism, and I rejected that, and I headed in the opposite direction.
Don chose instead to follow Marxism.
It was a godless worldview, a worldview that elevated man and diminished God.
Don's man-centered ideal ultimately evolved into a secular humanism that rejected traditional morality. It influenced every aspect of his life, even his personal relationships.
When you have no God, you have no right, and you have no wrong, and you have no one to whom you're going to be ultimately accountable to. So I was married, but I wanted to be married to somebody else. So no problem. You get rid of your wife so that you can marry the person that you want to be married to.
Suzy Pankowski was Don's high school sweetheart. When he decided she was the one he really wanted, he divorced his wife and convinced her to walk out on her own marriage to reunite with him.
There was a part of me that was kind of on the edge of rebellion, and meeting Don at that point was just took me right over the edge, because here I met kind of a soulmate.
Suzy's decision flew in the face of her Christian upbringing, but by then she'd made up her mind to compromise her beliefs.
I didn't want to get out of the church. I wanted to still one foot in the world and one foot in the church, and if you can imagine, I'm witnessing to him and living obviously an ungodly lifestyle.
I considered Christianity a fairy tale for little kids and old ladies.
I knew I was in big trouble, and yet I did not want to be with him. I just knew that the road ahead was going to be really, really tough.
And it was tough. Don lived his life wide open based on his ego-centered desires.
My worldview certainly shaped our marriage, at least with respect to my behavior, because I never embraced monogamy.
We had bought into the big lie that, you know, the only thing you were going to regret were those things you hadn't done. So you didn't want to miss doing anything.
Happiness was not only self-gratification, it was wealth. They achieved one business success after another: a thriving roofing business, a profitable joint venture in Jamaica, a lucrative flower exporting operation.
We had property in Washington and Virginia, and we had property in Jamaica, and I measured my own personal value by the things that I had accumulated.
We worked 7 days a week. We didn't take Sundays off. We simply just were always striving and incredible stress, always after this goal that Don was trying to go after.
I always thought that Frank Sinatra sang that song just for me. I did it my way, because I did it my way, and it worked. And more than anybody I knew, I was an island unto myself. I didn't need anybody.
The Warrens soon had their first child. They started her in modeling when she was 8, and throughout her childhood they preached the importance of achievement and success.
A year after I started modeling, if that, I was able to purchase my own horse, and I started riding. My parents would drop me off at the farm on the weekends, and I was riding and began showing very young, and was able to purchase, buy, and sell horses for myself.
She quickly adopted her father's view of religion as well.
The messages that I heard were simply fairy tale kind of stories, and it wasn't for mentally and emotionally strong people like me.
Don had the whole family climbing the ladder, but eventually it began to take its toll, especially when business suddenly took a downturn.
We were doing all the things we'd done before that had always worked and had been successful, and all of a sudden they weren't working. But the stress that I had put on myself, really, to work and make everything right was not happening. And I just felt I was exhausted, probably as close to an emotional breakdown as you can get without being there. I went to a business call with a woman who we had done business with in the past, and I was explaining some of the struggles, and she said to me, "Well, have you ever thought about praying about it?" I just kind of looked at her and didn't really say anything because I was just much too guilty to talk to God. But I went out to my car and just with an absolute broken heart, I called out to God and I said, "I have just, in rebellion and pride, just tried to live my life the way I wanted to, and I've made a mess of it. It was an absolute just breaking of my heart toward the Lord.
Suzy surrendered to the Lord, and that day, she decided she had to walk away from the business.
Prior to that, everything always seemed to work. And then my empire was collapsing around me.
Don worked day and night, believing in his pride that he could ultimately save the business on the strength of his own efforts.
I had an insurance adjuster. He used to start telling me about Jesus. But I listened to him. I humored him because I needed the business. In fact, I even had him to dinner at my house. And we were out in the back on the two-story deck. And I jumped up to sit on the rail. And he said, "Look out, you might fall." And I turned to him and said, "I don't fall." He said, "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Well, man, that meant absolutely nothing to me. It went right over my head. But exactly 1 week after Brian said those words, I was on this two-story roof surveying my kingdom, if you will. I remember thinking that it looked like I was going to pull it out, that I was going to turn this financial reversal around. And I remember thinking, "Don, you did it. I knew you could do it." At the very instant that I said that, I was literally swept off this roof in a fashion that made me think somebody pushed me. I was unable to catch myself. I slid off the roof and got driven into the ground like a stake.
Don was knocked unconscious from the 30-foot fall. His leg had been severely broken.
As I came to after being knocked out, this was the sound. Pride goeth before destruction. I turned to see who was talking to me, and there was nobody there. But when I finally gathered my senses and looked at my leg, I knew I was in trouble. I had to crawl to my truck, and I drove to the hospital.
Don spent the next several weeks in a leg cast as his business nearly ground to a halt. He finally reached the breaking point when he discovered that Suzy, who'd become pregnant, was about to lose their second child, a child they both desperately wanted.
She relayed to me that she had started to bleed, which was the first stage of losing the pregnancy. Probably that one point in my life where I was completely out of control. My business was in collapse. I was physically busted up. And this was something that which I could do absolutely nothing about.
Feeling helpless and confused, Don decided to look for answers beyond his own abilities.
I was watching the Coral Ridge Hour with Dr. D. James Kennedy. With no options left to me, I broke down and I prayed to a God that I didn't even believe in. But if there was a God that was powerful enough to count the hairs on my head, that there was a God who could save my little baby. It was like scales fell off my eyes. And for the very first time in my life, I could see that it was my sin that nailed Christ to a cross. Everything in my paradigm was shifted. Simply God. God reaching in and pulling out that heart of stone and putting in a heart of flesh. God saved my baby in a miraculous way. She's 5.5 years old today.
But the excitement of their new child being saved was overshadowed by their other child becoming more and more lost.
I had worked very hard and gotten what I wanted. And yet, all of a sudden, when I was 15, their things that they had worked for my whole life were gone. Jesus had stolen my daddy. My father, who now had no means, no longer said, "Well, we'll find a way to do it." He would say, "If God wants it done, it will happen."
But the frustration slowly dissipated as she saw Christ being lived out in the lives of her parents.
They just had this peacefulness and this joy about them that was, it had me in awe, literally, that I wanted to know what it was that made them so happy.
Don and Suzy soon dedicated their lives to telling others about Christ, all the while patiently waiting and praying for their daughter's salvation.
I came home one night a year later, and my baby, she said, "Dad, what do you do when you go out there?" And my heart's beating out of my chest. And I shared with her that night, my baby, prayed to receive Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior.
When I was very young, I saw the world as mine. Now, I see the world as really, what God wants to give me. It's so wonderful to be able to have the little 5-year-old influence in the house, and to know that my life is something that's reflecting on her.
With their daughter's salvation, the Warrens were now united in their desire to boldly speak the gospel no matter what, no matter where.
At the same time we were doing a business in Jamaica, there was another fellow, he was my competitor, trying to do the same business in Haiti. I used to console myself. I would say, well, at least we're not in Haiti. I think God has a sense of humor, because he started putting a burden on my heart for Haiti. Everywhere I turned, it was Haiti.
Don now leads EE training and missions efforts in Haiti.
It's just so exciting to see what God has done and how he's used even the different businesses and the things that we've done. It's as if he went to school to work offshore and to do this.
Haiti's problem is not fundamentally an economic problem. It's a spiritual problem. And even today in the rural parts of Haiti, a pregnant woman is taken to the local voodoo priest. And the voodoo priest performs a ceremony for this pregnant woman that assigns the demon to the unborn child.
Despite the predominant occultic practices, God has provided the Warrens with opportunities to spread the good news of the gospel to thousands.
We introduced the Jesus film to an area that had never had it before. And then we started to do evangelism explosion training clinics. We had a clinic that was 683 clinicians, and I understand that's the largest clinic that's ever been conducted. We have an obligation to the world because we are the only Jesus that many people will ever see.
The Warrens are shining examples that there is a way out of desperation and spiritual wickedness.
I was ever in pursuit of that elusive thing called happiness. Having come to Christ, having surrendered my life to the Lordship of Jesus Christ, everywhere I turn, there's happiness.